My next guest is a trenchant political observer, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to use the word trenchant in this week's episode. You probably know his writing. Greg Sargent writes the Plumb Line blog at the Washington Post, which is widely read, including by yours truly. He has written for other publications as well, and he has a new book out entitled An Uncivil War, Taking Back Our Democracy in an Age of Trumpian Disinformation and Thunderdome Politics. I've been reading it. It is well-researched, very thoughtful, and very interesting. And he joins us now. So first of all, Greg Sargent, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for the kind words.
Oh, you got it. And now, obviously, your subtitle tells us that your position is that our democracy is something we need to take back. You cover politics on a daily basis. When did you come to that conclusion?
Well, I guess we worked out the subhead pretty late in the process, but I think basically the second Trump won, a lot of people were already saying we were in deep trouble, right? I think you saw a whole barrage of books coming out and papers that sort of said that a slide into autocracy is imminent and so forth. There was a lot of great work. I actually think we're in much better shape now than many people expected. But my original idea was, in a way, to try to say that that there's a deep disconnect at the core of everything right now, which is that it took a figure like Trump to focus everyone's attention on the state of our democracy, yet all these problems with our system long predated him and are going to outlast him. And so what I try to argue in this book is that we have to capture this kind of pro-democracy energy that has been unleashed by his menacing presence and try to hold on to it after he's gone. And so, I mean, we shouldn't need him to galvanize attention to our political system. And so that's really what the book's about.
And that's one of the things I've been appreciating about the book, Greg, is that, you know, I'm not the only one to use this phrase, but, you know, I suppose I spontaneously came up with it as others did, but the notion of Trump exceptionalism, that somehow Trump stands unique and apart from other systemic problems we have with our democracy, I think deprives us of an opportunity to look at the fundamental challenges and problems that gave rise to a Donald Trump as president in the first place. And I think you do an excellent job in this book of tying the pieces together there. So what are the forces?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. What are the forces you see as being those we should pay special attention to?
Well, what I argue in the book is that that we're seeing an incremental democratic backsliding, and that term is used by political scientists to mean a range of things. It can mean something very dramatic, like a coup or an overthrow of a leader. And of course, I don't mean it in that sense here. I mean it as in the incremental sense. And incremental backsliding happens when politicians capture the rules of political competition and kind of pervert them and subvert them to partisan and nefarious ends to entrench their power. And sometimes that has an anti-democratic effect, and that is happening here in many ways with things like voter suppression schemes and partisan gerrymandering. And so those are I'm fairly preoccupied with that stuff largely, and then also the kind of enormous levels of the gale force disinformation that's been unleashed on the system as well, and then also the profusion of legislative and constitutional hardball that Republicans mostly, though not exclusively, have been playing in recent years. All these things add up to a series of degradations. And you're right to say that, in a way, when we just see Trump as the primary driver of everything, it actually distracts us from this other stuff.
And again, we're talking with Greg Sargent, whose new book is an Uncivil War, Taking Back Our Democracy in an Age of Trumpian Disinformation and Thunderdome Politics. That's probably the last time in this interview I'll repeat the entire...
it's a mouthful.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're, in that sense, in a perverse sort of way, I guess you could say that Trump offers an opportunity to cast a spotlight on some of these fundamental issues. One of the things that...
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things that surprises me a little bit is that my sense is, but I'm interested in what you think, my sense is that neither the Democrats nor perhaps the media overall are talking quite enough about voter suppression in its various forms. This, to me personally, represents a frontal assault on the notion of democracy that's supposed to be at the heart of our political values and our political culture, and yet people are being deprived of the ability to vote in a variety of means. It probably changed the outcome. If you believe that it changed the outcome, for example, to strike 90,000 people from the rolls in Florida in 2000, then it changed who became president in 2000 and so on. Am I right, or am I just not reading the tea leaves accurately, in your opinion? Isn't this something that people should be talking about even more?
Oh, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think you're right to use the word perverse, because particularly right now, Trump is trying to drum up all this hysteria around this caravan of destitute and migrants that are 1,000 miles from the border. And the amount of media attention being devoted to that compared to what's going on in places like Georgia and North Dakota, where there are voter suppression schemes unfolding, it is perverse. These things are happening right here at home, and they could actually tip elections, right? I mean,
right.
The latest polling I've seen shows the Georgia governor's race to be extraordinarily tight. And so, voter purges could make a difference. And that seems to me like as you say, it's a frontal assault on democratic values happening right here.
And one of the things we talk about a lot, and you write about, is when it comes to that kind of frontal assault, seems to be an enormous clash of cultures between the Republican and Democratic parties, where you have the Republican Party basically openly and blatantly doing whatever it takes to win. This is obviously my editorializing, but doing
Sure.
whatever it takes to win, clean, dirty, anything in between, and making no bones about it. And then you have Democrats over and over again talking about a culture of civility and a return to civility, and not only bringing a knife to a gunfight, but really saying, I don't want to fight, while the other guys are bringing out the heavy weaponry. And it seems to me, you talk about norm realism in your book, the idea that maybe Democrats have got to adapt to unfortunate political circumstances and get a little tougher. Am I interpreting you correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm glad you brought up the norm realism, because that's a piece of the book that I hope says something that will matter going forward. And I'd add about norm realism. What I try to get at there is that it's a much more complicated subject than we usually think of it as being. The left is making a very strong case right now that, as you say, stop talking about civility and get tougher, right? I mean, and they have a good case to make, because look at what the Republicans have done for the past 15 years or so with all the voter suppression and gerrymandering and so forth. Now, by norm realism, I mean something a little different than just get tougher. It's also the core difficulty of deciding when the political ends and policy ends justify a particular procedural means. And it's just a really hard question. And it sort of has to be resolved in a case-by-case way. And what I argue against is just sort of saying at the outset that if Democrats take back power, they should just go whole hog, full hog into total procedural hardball on every single front. And I say that I think we got to really think about it a little more carefully going forward. Of course, that could be a ways off. We don't know when Democrats are going to take back power everywhere. So, I mean, in the White House and Congress. But yeah, norm realism is a concept that I try to develop there, and I hope it worked.
Well, sure, it's a complicated question, and it's hard to know how to adapt to changing circumstances. But to me, Democrats getting tougher, of course, can mean many different things. But to me, it starts with, I don't even know if toughness is the only frame. To me, it seems to me that there's somehow, it's almost a sociological question or anthropological question, that it seems to me that among today's Democrats, or a lot of influential Democrats nowadays, there is an enormous sort of cultural and emotional attachment to certain sets of rules and behaviors. It's almost as if the rules and the process get exalted more than the outcome. And while you don't want to go to the other,
right.
You don't want to go to the other extreme of, the ends always justify the means. It seems to me also voters get turned off if all you want to talk about is we're following the rules and they're not. Do you get what I'm trying to drive at?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good case, and one of the arguments I develop in there comes from a political theorist named William Galston, he's a really smart guy, and he argues something similar to what you said. What he argues is that public officials and politicians actually have a responsibility to play hardball because they've been entrusted with power, and they need to show that they are willing to use it. And so, as you say, voters get frustrated when politicians are overly obsessed with norms and rules over outcomes. And so, what this guy argues, and I sort of semi-endorse the concept, is that very fact about voters kind of requires politicians to be willing to push the envelope. I mean, voters empowered them for a reason, to get things done and to make things happen in accordance with the agenda that they ran on. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a little tough though. You don't want to. If we all sort of say that means that politicians can just do whatever they want at any time, then basic norms of fair play go out the window, and I don't know where we are after that.
Well, normally when fair play goes out the window, the decent people wind up losing because they're not as good at unfair play as the other guys. But that's yeah. But that said, I guess the other thing that occurs to me about that is that you want to, obviously want to somehow maintain the rules of fair play, but you don't want to I'm not sure voters are wrong to be upset about it because they want to know that the politicians will do everything within their power to make their lives better, right? That's why they sent them there.
Right. I think that's right. I think that's a real consideration, and in a way, I argue that norm realism requires a recognition of that as well.
So what's the main takeaway you would want people to have in either thinking about your book, or probably from your point of view, much better actually going out and purchasing your book? What is the main thing?
Well, that would be great.
Yeah, well, that's I understand that's part of the deal. So what would you want people to know about the book before I let you go?
Well, I basically argue in here that we shouldn't despair too much. I think we're going to get through the current situation. Obviously, I'm no promises, but it seems to me that our institutions are mostly holding up, that the media has retained its core independence and is doing a lot of good work, that Trump has not severely undermined the rule of law in ways that people expected, although he's beaten it around a bit, and that ultimately things really can get better if Democrats win back a bunch of ground on the state level and start reforming our democracy with things like making it easier to vote, commissions to unwind gerrymandered maps. I feel like the overall message here should be that we can improve the system on a number of fronts, and I argue for keeping that in mind long-term going forward. But people really have to vote. I mean, voting is the key to everything. Voting in this election is the very beginning of it all. Vote, people.
Well, we're all
important one.
Yeah, we're all about getting people to vote too. And by the way, in closing, I'll just say that if I had to tell Democrats to focus on one state-level elected office all around the country, it would be Secretary of State.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
I wish I had written about that in the book. That is a terrific. It's an important point, and it really is not widely appreciated.
Well, we will continue to hammer it here, and I know you will too. Greg Sargent writes the Plumline blog for the Washington Post, and he is the author of the new book, An Uncivil War, with a very long and interesting subtitle that I urge you to go out and buy and read. So, Greg, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much. Take care.